I remember the first time I felt the forest breathe around me. The fog hung low, curling around the trunks like restless spirits, and the path ahead was barely more than a whisper of mud and fallen leaves. Every step made a soft squelch, echoing in a silence so thick it pressed against my ears. Pale light flickered through the dense branches, dancing like distant candles, revealing shapes that could have been trees or something else. I swore I heard static humming behind the wind, a low resonance that didn't belong to nature. The deeper I walked, the more the world outside dissolved. There were no roads, no houses, only the scent of damp earth and pine, and the faint rustle of something moving just beyond sight. I felt eyes on me, though I couldn't see them. A cabin appeared through the fog, small, lonely, almost forgotten, its windows dim and uninviting. I hesitated at the door, my hand hovering over the worn wood, and a cold realization sank in. This place was alive in a way I couldn't understand. That's when I saw it. Twilight found me at the edge of the forest. Late autumn. The air smelled like wet bark and cold soil. Leaves clung to the ground, dark and soft beneath my boots. The light thinned slowly. Not night yet, but no longer day. I stood where the trees began, where trunks crowded close together, as if sharing something they didn't want me to hear. The sky behind me still held color. Ahead, only shadow. The forest stretched its shapes. Too far, too long. Branches bent where no wind touched them. Shadows slid across the ground, pulling away from their owners. Some leaned sideways. Some reached forward, thin and crooked, like fingers testing the earth. I told myself it was the angle of the light, the last slant of the sun. Nothing more, but my chest felt tight, breath shallow, cold pressing in behind my ribs. I stepped closer. The forest answered with silence, so thick it pressed against my ears. Even the insects had stopped. A low vibration passed through the ground. Not loud, not sudden. It hummed through my feet, into my legs, up my spine. A growl, but distant, wide, as if it came from everywhere at once. The trees seemed to hold it, their trunks faintly trembling beneath my palm. The bark felt warm, too warm. Fog slid out from between the roots. Slow, careful. It wrapped around my ankles first, damp and cold, soaking through fabric. Each step after that felt muted, as if the ground were swallowing my weight. My footsteps disappeared. No crunch, no snap of twig, only the quiet press of fog against skin. I moved forward without meaning to, drawn by something I couldn't see, something that waited just beyond the next tree. The shadows shifted again. One bent the wrong way. Another stretched upward, peeling itself off the forest floor. I blinked, and it settled back into place. When I looked directly at the spaces between the trees, they were empty. But when my eyes drifted, when I let my focus soften, something gathered there, a presence, close enough to feel. The air behind my neck grew heavy. Warm breath brushed my skin, faint and damp. I didn't turn. The growl returned, softer now, lower, almost thoughtful. It rolled through the trunks, vibrating through leaves and bone alike. The forest felt awake, aware. Fog climbed higher, curling around my knees, my thighs. It carried the smell of old water and decay. Something sweet underneath. Something wrong. I paused. The world leaned in. I could feel it watching. Not from one place, but from many, as if the trees themselves had eyes buried deep beneath the bark. When I turned my head, slowly, carefully, there was nothing there. Only trees. Only shadow. Only fog. But the moment my gaze shifted away, the weight returned. Heavier this time. Closer. My skin prickled. Every nerve alive and buzzing like static beneath flesh. I swallowed. The sound felt too loud. Somewhere deep in the forest, something moved. Not walking. Not running. Gliding. The fog parted just enough for a shape to form. Tall, uneven, bending where no body should bend. It didn't step forward. It didn't retreat. It simply existed. When I focused on it, the shape unraveled. Fog again. Empty space. My heart slowed in a way that scared me more than panic ever could. Each beat felt delayed, measured, The growl faded into a vibration beneath the ground, then into nothing at all. Silence pressed down. Absolute. Total. Even my breath felt distant, like it belonged to someone else standing nearby. I realized then that the forest hadn't worn me away. It had noticed me. Shadows crept closer, overlapping at my feet. They tangled together, thick and dark, refusing to separate. I stood very still. The fog brushed my hands. My wrists, cold fingers tracing veins beneath skin. Something shifted just beyond my vision, close enough that I could feel the space bent around it. I turned my head again. Nothing. The forest exhaled. A long, slow release that stirred leaves without moving them. I felt small, exposed, like a thought that had been noticed by something much older. The light finally gave up. Twilight collapsed into gray. Shadows claimed their places again, or pretended to. I took one step back. Then another. The fog resisted, clinging, reluctant to let go. When I reached the edge of the trees, the pressure lifted all at once. The growl was gone. The fog thinned. Behind me, the forest stood quiet. Still, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep and cold, that something had followed every step, and it had not vanished. Night settled in slowly, not all at once. It seeped between the trees, dimming edges, softening distance. The forest felt closer now, crowded, as if the dark had pushed everything inward. Moonlight filtered through the canopy in thin, broken lines. Pale light resting on leaves, on fog, on the narrow path ahead. I stood still listening, not for footsteps, not for breath, for the absence of both. The air carried a faint hum, low and constant, like tension stretched too tight. It vibrated behind my ears, inside my jaw. I could feel it more than hear it. Something shifted in the underbrush. Not loud, just enough to disturb the fog. My eyes moved before my body did, instinct pulling my focus to the left. That's when I saw them. 2 points of light, low to the ground, fixed. They reflected the moon in a dull, pale shine. Not bright, not sharp. Watching. They didn't blink, didn't sway with the movement of leaves, didn't react when the fog rolled between us. I stopped breathing. The forest seemed to notice. Leaves froze mid-rustle. Branches held their scrape. Even the hum thinned, stretched tight like a held note. The eyes stayed where they were. I counted my heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Each pulse felt loud inside my skull, like a signal I couldn't turn off. I shifted my weight just slightly. The ground pressed back, soft and damp. The eyes did not move. They weren't curious. They weren't startled. They were patient. Fog slid across my shins, cool and wet, carrying the smell of moss and old decay. It wrapped around my calves, then drifted on, as if afraid to linger too long. The hum returned, stronger now, not coming from the trees, from the space between us. I realized then how still the eyes were. Too still. No breath disturbed the brush. No body rose or fell behind them. Just a gaze. I took a careful step backward. The crunch of a leaf sounded sharp in the quiet. Too sharp. The eyes flickered. Not gone. Just adjusted, like a reflection changing angle. My stomach tightened, cold spreading outward from somewhere deep. I told myself it was an animal, deer, fox, something small and alert. But animals blink. They shift. They breathe. These eyes only watched. The hum thickened, filling my chest, making each inhale feel shallow. My hands tingled, numb and prickling at the same time. I raised my head slowly, trying to see more of the shape behind the light. Moonlight brushed the fog. The underbrush remained dark. Nothing formed. No outline. No movement. Just the eyes. They felt closer than they should have been, as if distance didn't apply to them the way it did to me. Another step back. This time, the fog moved first, pulling away from the eyes, drifting toward me instead. As it passed, the pale light dimmed slightly. The eyes didn't disappear. They deepened. I swallowed. The sound felt like it echoed. The hum shifted in pitch, almost like it was responding. Not louder, Lower. Something inside me leaned forward. Not my body. Curiosity. Sharp and unwelcome. I hated that part of myself in that moment. The urge to look longer. To understand. The eyes reflected again, brighter now, catching a stronger slice of moonlight. They were set wider apart than they should be. Too low, too far from where a face would make sense. My breath came out in a thin cloud. The fog swallowed it instantly. I waited for the eyes to move. They didn't. Time stretched, thinned, each second slipping sideways instead of forward. The forest leaned in again, listening. Somewhere behind me, a branch creaked under its own weight. The sound traveled too far, rolling between trunks. The eyes flickered once more. Closer, not by distance, by presence. My skin crawled, heat rising along my neck and ears. The hum pressed harder, vibrating through teeth and bone. I realized then that the eyes weren't watching me move. They were watching me notice them. The moment I understood, the fog surged, thick and sudden, swallowing the underbrush entirely. When it cleared, the eyes were gone. The space they had occupied fell hollow. Open. Wrong. The hum faded into the background again, quieter but still there, waiting. I stood frozen, staring at empty leaves and damp soil. My pulse refused to slow. The forest resumed its quiet motions. A leaf falling, a branch shifting. Too normal. I didn't relax. Because even without the eyes, I could still feel the weight of being watched. Not from the underbrush, from everywhere else. The fog thickened as I walked. Not rolling, not drifting, waiting. Each step forward felt borrowed, as if the ground might ask for it back. The forest thinned ahead, trees pulling apart just enough to reveal a shape where none should have been. A cabin. It stood at the edge of the clearing, half swallowed by mist, crooked, settled into the earth like it had grown there. The windows were dark, not broken, not boarded, just unwelcoming. Moonlight brushed the roof in pale streaks, revealing warped shingles slick with damp. The smell reached me before the structure did. Old wood, rot, rain that never fully dried. I stopped a few steps away. The fog pooled low around the foundation, curling against the walls like it was listening. The forest behind me went quiet again. Too quiet. No insects. No wind. Only my breath, thin and careful. The door waited. I didn't remember deciding to reach for it. My hand moved on its own, fingers brushing the rough surface of the wood. Cold, splintered. When I pushed, the hinges answered with a slow creak. Long tired. The sound traveled farther than it should have, sliding into the trees and not coming back. Inside, the air was stale and heavy. Dust clung to everything, the floor, the walls, the air itself. Each breath tasted dry, faintly metallic. I stepped inside. The door eased shut behind me, guided by its own weight. The final thud was soft. Final. Moonlight slipped through the windows in dull rectangles, barely touching the floor. The rest of the room stayed in shadow. Corners gathered darkness. Not still, not empty. The shadows pooled there, thick and layered, bending inward like they were folding themselves smaller. They didn't match the angles of the room. I stood in the center, afraid to move too far, in any direction. The floorboards groaned beneath my boots, low and strained, as if surprised to be used again. The smell was stronger here. Mold. Old rain. Something sour underneath. Faint but persistent. I listened. At first, there was nothing, just a pressure of silence pressing against my ears. Then a whisper, so soft it almost felt imagined. It slid along the wall to my left, barely disturbing the dust. Not words, not sound, more like breath brushing across memory. I turned slowly. The wall was bare, peeling paint, dark stains that might have been water or something else. The whisper moved again, this time behind me. It traced the length of the room, careful, deliberate. My skin prickled, every hair lifted at once. The shadows in the corners shifted, not crawling, not reaching, twisting. They stretched upward, thinning and thickening in the same motion, like something testing its shape. When moonlight touched them, they recoiled slightly, retreating just enough to pretend they hadn't moved. I swallowed. The sound felt loud, too present. Dust stirred near the ceiling, floating in slow spirals. No breeze followed. No reason. I took a step forward. The floorboard beneath me dipped, then settled. The sound echoed strangely, as if the room were deeper than it appeared. The whisper returned, closer now, right beside my ear. Still not words, but intent. It felt like something trying to remember how to speak. I backed away, my shoulder brushing the wall. The wood felt damp through my coat. Cold seeped in. The cabin seemed smaller now, walls pressing inward, ceiling lowering by degrees too small to measure. I moved toward the window, drawn by the thin wash of moonlight. When I reached it, the glass was cloudy, filmed with age and moisture. Outside, the fog churned slowly, thick and restless. Trees stood just beyond it, their shapes warped, bending away from the cabin as if giving it space. I pressed my palm to the glass. It was warmer than it should have been. Behind me, the whisper faded into a hush. The shadows stilled. For a moment, everything paused. Then the silence deepened. Not empty listening. I felt it then. The sense that the cabin was aware of me, not welcoming, not hostile, assessing. My breath fogged the window briefly before vanishing into mist outside. The forest offered nothing back. When I turned away from the glass, the room looked unchanged. Same dust, same shadows, but the feeling lingered, like I had crossed a line I couldn't see. The whisper did not return. The cabin held its breath. I stood there, alone in the dim light, knowing, without knowing how, that the silence was not peace. It was restraint. I left the cabin without looking back. The door didn't protest this time. It let me go. Outside, the fog had thickened, rising higher than before. It brushed my waist, my ribs, carrying damp cold through my clothes. The forest waited in pale layers, trees fading in and out like half-remembered shapes. Then I felt it, a hum, low, steady. It didn't come from one direction. It lived in the air, in the soil, in the space behind my eyes. Each pulse vibrated through my bones, subtle but insistent. I paused. The pines ahead began to sway. Not together, not with rhythm. Each tree moved on its own, slow and deliberate, as if listening for instructions. Their needles whispered against one another, brushing softly despite the still air. No wind touched my face. The hum deepened. I stepped forward, though every part of me resisted. My boots sank slightly into the ground, the earth soft and yielding, as if reluctant to let me pass. Each step grew heavier, not from exhaustion, from pressure. The forest pressed back. Fog coiled around my legs, tightening, tugging gently as I moved. It felt almost careful, almost guiding. The hum shifted again, rising just enough to make my teeth buzz. It wasn't loud. It was close. I realized the sound wasn't surrounding me. It was pulling. Between the pines, the darkness thickened, pooling beneath their branches. Moonlight barely reached the forest floor here, broken into pale fragments. Something moved at the edge of my vision. I didn't turn. I kept my eyes forward, fixed on the narrow space between two trunks where the fog thinned slightly. The hum seemed strongest there. My breath came shallow. Each inhale tasted of sap and damp wood. The pines leaned closer as I passed, their branches hanging low. Needles brushed my shoulders, my hair, leaving a faint sting on my skin. Still no wind. The hum vibrated through my chest now, matching my heartbeat. Or maybe my heart was matching it. I wasn't sure anymore. Shapes slid just beyond sight. Tall, narrow, bending where bodies shouldn't bend. Every time I tried to focus, they slipped away, dissolving into shadow and mist. Fear crept in quietly. Not sudden, not sharp. It settled deep, heavy and patient. The ground resisted more with every step, thick and damp beneath my feet. I had the strange thought that if I stopped moving, it might hold me there. The hum softened briefly, like it was waiting for something. I slowed. The trees responded. They swayed closer, branches creaking softly, needles brushing together in a sound like distant breath. The fog thickened, rising to my chest. My hands tingled numb and cold. Something passed behind me. Not touching, not brushing, just close enough to disturb the fog, leaving a brief hollow that closed again instantly. I didn't turn. The hum surged, vibrating through my skull, blurring the edges of my thoughts. Memories felt distant, unimportant. Only the path ahead mattered. The pines opened slightly, revealing a deeper pocket of darkness. The fog there moved differently, slower, heavier, almost layered. I felt a pull in my chest, a quiet urge to step into it. Fear wrapped around that urge, tightening slowly, insidious, persistent. I stopped again. The hum did not fade. It held steady, pressing gently, insistently, like a hand against my back. The forest seemed to pause with me. No sway, no rustle. A moment stretched thin. Then something shifted in the darkness ahead. Not forming, not revealing itself, just acknowledging me. My skin prickled with cold. Every instinct screamed to retreat, but my feet remained planted. The hum softened, almost soothing now, almost kind. That frightened me more than anything else. I took one careful step backward. The ground loosened slightly, releasing its grip. The hum wavered. The trees straightened by degrees too small to see all at once. Another step back. The fog thinned just enough for my breath to show. The hum faded slowly, reluctantly, sinking back into the forest like a held note finally released. When it was gone, the silence felt wrong. Too sudden, too empty. The pines stood still again, ordinary in the pale light. No sway, no movement. But as I turned away, my ears rang faintly, and deep in my chest, the echo of that hum remained. Quiet, patient, waiting for me to listen again. The forest had grown still, too still. Even the fog seemed to hesitate with each step I took. Leaves above me shivered, but the air was motionless. No breeze, no breath, only the soft scraping, rustling sound that did not belong to the wind. I froze. The noise circled above, shifting in rhythm, sometimes near, sometimes far. It threaded through the fog, twisting around my legs and ankles, cold fingers brushing through my sleeves. Shadows moved differently here, faster, edges blurred, flickering shapes that darted at the corners of my vision and vanished the instant I turned my head. A silhouette passed between the trunks, tall, thin, bending impossibly, not running, not walking, just gliding. Claws scraped the earth softly, deliberately, a rhythm in the silence that felt meant for me alone. Each tap and drag pressed into my chest. Every heartbeat followed it. The fog clung to my knees, then my thighs, weaving into my coat and hair. I could smell damp soil and decaying leaves, faintly sweet beneath the rot. The forest seemed aware of my presence, waiting, observing, testing. I tried to convince myself it was only my imagination, only tired eyes and overactive nerves. But the rustling persisted, always behind, always just beyond clear sight. I stepped forward. The ground resisted, soft and giving, almost reluctant to carry me. The shadows shifted faster. They didn't belong to any tree or bush. They moved independently, creeping toward me without sound, folding into the fog. A sudden scrape ran across the ground, closer this time. Not a branch, not a stone, something deliberate, something alive. I swallowed. The taste of iron filled my mouth. My pulse tightened. Regret curled around my stomach like smoke. Every step I took felt amplified. Crunches, taps, scrapes, echoing loudly in my ears. Yet when I glanced over my shoulder, the space was empty. Nothing. The forest pressed in. Shadows swayed along the edges of my vision, avoiding the moonlight, but never leaving. I could feel them, always just behind, waiting for me to stumble. A fleeting silhouette passed through the fog again, tall, pale, and possibly still. And for a moment, I thought I caught a glimpse of her along its limbs. Pale, luminous, watching. The air vibrated softly. The rustling continued, now layering, overlapping, forming its own rhythm. It was patient, intentional. My legs shook, though I didn't stop moving. Each step forward became harder. Each breath felt distant, swallowed by the fog. I paused. The scraping halted. The shadows paused. The forest seemed to exhale, slowly, deliberately. And in that moment of stillness, I understood I was not walking alone. And the fog, the rustling, the shapes, they had been following me all along. I swallowed hard. The sound was loud in my chest. I moved again, one step at a time, past shapes that never fully revealed themselves, past a forest that refused to be ordinary. Regret pressed against me, tight and cold, and I knew, somewhere in the rustling without wind, I had already been marked. The mist thickened without warning, not rolling in, not drifting closer. It rose. Cold wrapped around my shoulders, damp and heavy, sinking through fabric and skin alike. Each breath tasted pale and thin, like air that had been used too many times. The forest blurred. Trunks softened into gray pillars. Distance collapsed. Then the whispers began. Not from one place. Not even from many. They lived inside the fog itself. Soft threads of sound brushed against my ears, sliding along my thoughts rather than entering them. I couldn't understand the words. No shape, no language I knew, yet they felt familiar, personal. Their repeated patterns that tugged at memory, a cadence I almost recognized, a rhythm that made my chest tighten. The mist pressed closer, curling around my neck, my wrists, my face. It felt deliberate, careful. I stopped walking. The whispers continued. Some were close, brushing my ear like breath. Others came from deeper within the fog, stretched thin and distant. They overlapped without colliding, weaving into something dense and intimate. My name hovered on the edge of hearing, not spoken, implied. The air grew warmer around my head, colder around my feet. The contrast made my skin prickle, every nerve alert and strained. Shapes began to form. Not fully, never fully. Blurred outlines gathered in the mist, tall, narrow, almost human. Their edges softened and shifted, refusing to settle. Arms that bent the wrong way. Heads that tilted too far. They didn't approach. They assembled. The whispers threaded through them, giving them presence without substance. Each shape felt aware of me, turned inward, listening. My breath came shallow. The fog swallowed it instantly, leaving my chest feeling hollow. I took a step back. The mist followed. It clung tighter now, brushing my cheek, my throat, damp and cold like fingers lingering too long. The whispers lowered, growing slower, heavier. I tried to focus on one sound, just one, but the moment I did, it slipped away, replaced by another. The shapes shifted closer together, not moving forward, compressing, as if the space around me was shrinking. My heart pounded, loud and uneven. Each beat felt exposed, broadcast into fog. The whispers seemed to respond, tightening in rhythm. A sudden hush rippled through the mist. For one brief moment, everything stopped. No whisper, no movement. Then a single murmur brushed against my ear, so soft it barely existed. It carried weight, meaning without language. My throat tightened. Fear settled deep and steady, not sharp, not panic, just absolute. The shapes leaned inward, their outlines blurring together, melting back into fog. They never touched me. They didn't need to. The whispers returned, slower now, calmer, as if satisfied, as if they had learned something. Gradually, the mist loosened its grip. It slipped from my shoulders, my neck, retreating in thin curls. The shapes dissolved with it, leaving only pale gray air and the dark suggestion of trees beyond. The forest remained silent, too silent. I stood alone again, breath trembling, skin cold and damp. The fog thin enough for me to see a few steps ahead. But the feeling didn't leave, the sense of being known. The whispers faded into memory, but their echoes stayed, coiled somewhere deep, repeating words I still couldn't understand. And as I moved forward once more, I realized the mist hadn't been speaking to scare me. It had been speaking to remember me. I started walking again, slowly, carefully. The fog thinned just enough to show the path beneath my feet. Dark soil, scattered leaves, roots slick with moisture. Every step felt deliberate, measured. Then I heard it, a footstep, not ahead, not beside me, behind. It matched my pace exactly. Soft, damp, careful not to rush. I stopped. The sound stopped with me. Silence rushed in, pressing tight against my ears. My heart thudded once hard, then slowed. I waited. Nothing. I took another step. So, did it. The timing was perfect. Too perfect. My breath shortened, fogging faintly in front of my face. The air felt colder now, heavier along my spine. I tried to change my rhythm. 2 quick steps, then a pause. The footsteps followed. Exact. Faithful. Panic settled into my chest. Thick and slow, like something poured rather than felt. My shoulders tightened. My hands tingled, numb and buzzing. I turned around. The path behind me was empty. Fog drifted lazily between the trees, pale and indifferent. No shape, no shadow out of place. I stared longer than felt safe. Nothing moved. When I turned back around, my pulse spiked, sharp and sudden. The forest ahead felt closer, as if the trees had leaned in while my back was turned. I walked again. The footsteps returned. Closer now. Not louder, nearer. Each step carried weight I could feel through the ground. A dull pressure following just behind my heels. The fog brushed my calves, my knees, curling upward like it wanted to hide the space between us. I could smell damp earth and old leaves, sharp and metallic. I swallowed. The sound felt amplified, swallowed late by the air. The footsteps adjusted, not mimicking anymore, learning. A twig snapped somewhere behind me. The crack echoed too long, rolling through the trees like a signal. My chest tightened. Breath came shallow and fast, scraping against my throat. I sped up. So, did it. The fog thickened, blurring the edges of the path. Shadows slid between trunks, stretching, retracting, never settling. I stopped suddenly. The footsteps stopped, a fraction too late. That delay told me everything. I didn't turn right away. Fear held me still, heavy and pressing. I listened instead. The forest breathed. Slow, controlled. Something behind me breathed too. Not loud, not rushed. Close. I turned. Nothing. No footprints. No disturbed leaves. But the air where it should have been felt warm. Used. My heart hammered now. Sharp and uneven. Each beat a reminder that I was still here. Still moving. I faced forward again and continued. Slower this time. Quieter. The footsteps followed at a distance that never changed. Never closed. Never fell back. A perfect shadow to my movement. Every snap of twig, every brush of fabric against fog felt magnified, stretched thin through the silence. My nerves buzzed like exposed wire. I realized then that it wasn't trying to hide. It wanted me to know. The path curved slightly, trees pressing closer on either side. The fog rose higher, swallowing the ground. I could no longer see my own feet, but I could still hear mine. And the ones behind me, matching, patient. I kept walking because stopping felt worse, because turning back felt impossible. The footsteps stayed with me, calm and steady, like a promise made long ago. And somewhere deep in my chest, beneath the panic, a colder fear took shape, that whatever followed me had no intention of passing me by. The fog drew me back to the cabin. I didn't know why. Some need inside me pushed forward, gentle but insistent. The forest pressed close, shadows stretching long and thin around my ankles. The cabin waited, dark, silent, its windows like blank eyes staring into the night. Then I saw them, 2 pale points of light, reflecting faint moonlight, fixed, unblinking, watching. I stopped, my chest tightened, every nerve alert. The fog wrapped around my legs, cold and damp, pulling me closer without touching. The hum of the forest pressed in. The eyes didn't move, didn't shift, didn't acknowledge my presence beyond the simple act of being seen. I stepped closer. The boards beneath my boots groaned softly. Each step felt louder than it should have, echoing against walls I couldn't see. The door waited, a promise or a warning. I wasn't sure. I reached for the handle. My fingers brushed the wood. Cold, rough, old. Something held me back. Not force, not pain, Just a whisper in the air, quiet enough to doubt, insistent enough to obey. I pressed my palm against the window, instead. Cold glass against skin. Fogged immediately from my breath. A pale hand seemed to linger my vision, not touching, just existing. The eyes blinked once, impossibly slow, and the forest seemed to inhale with me. Shadows pulled in corners, stretching long fingers across the floor. The fog swirled, rising to my knees, wrapping me in damp silence. I wanted to look away. I wanted to flee, but the gaze held me, patient, watching. A faint whisper slid across the walls. I couldn't catch the words. They weren't meant to be understood. They were meant to remind me I was not alone. I stepped back from the window. The eyes remained, fixed, unblinking. The fog shifted around me. The cabin exhaled. The forest listened. And I stood there, trembling in the cold, knowing that whatever waited inside, or beyond, was aware of every heartbeat. Night pressed down heavier than before. Fog clung to my legs, thick and damp, curling around boots and calves like it had weight of its own. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Then it came, a long, low howl, not from one creature, from the woods itself, vibrating through the ground, through the trunks, through the fog. It carried a resonance that made the soil tremble beneath my feet. Leaves rattled above, brushing against one another despite the still air. Branches groaned, bending unnaturally, reaching toward me. The sound rolled through the trees, stretching and folding, refusing to leave. My chest tightened, breath caught in my throat. The howl rose again, deeper, slower, intentional, not calling, announcing. Shadows darted between the trees, fast, too fast. Edges blurred and snapped into place where they shouldn't. Every time I focused, they shifted, dissolving back into fog. The earth vibrated beneath my boots. Not enough to topple me, just enough to remind me I was not alone. I felt the presence before I saw it. Something large, tall, looming between two trunks, bending at impossible angles. It paused as if watching, waiting. Another howl split the air, closer this time, sharper, the kind that rattled teeth and sent the hairs on my neck upright. The trees shivered in response. Their needles rattled, bark groaned. Even the fog seemed to tremble. My pulse hammered in my ears. Every heartbeat echoed in rhythm with the low vibration beneath my feet. Something was circling, not fast, but deliberate. Shadows slowed their movement, pausing mid-step, almost as if acknowledging me. The howl faded into a hum, deep and resonant, pressing through bone and muscle. My hands tingled, my teeth buzzed faintly. I realized then it wasn't chasing me. It had surrounded me, encircled me. The forest was aware of my every step. I swallowed, fog curling through my mouth with the cold bite of damp earth. A sense of dread settled into my chest. Not sharp, not sudden, slow, patient. The vibration beneath my feet matched my heartbeat now. Not accidental, not random. The final howl cut through, low and mournful, curling through the trees like smoke. Shadows darted one last time, then stilled. The forest waited, silent, watching. I stood frozen, fog twisting around my knees. Heart loud in the quiet, the howl lingering in my chest, and in that stillness I understood I was never alone, and I never would be. Morning arrived slowly, not light, not warmth, only a gray hush that draped the forest in pale silence. The fog lingered, thin now, curling at my ankles like it didn't want to leave. I looked down, footprints, around the cabin, circling endlessly, angles that made no sense. Twisting, turning, impossible paths that returned to where they began. I knelt, tracing them with trembling fingers. Cold, damp, the earth had soaked in rain from a night before, yet the impressions were clear, fresh. No one had entered, no one had left. I stood, heart thudding. The forest was quiet, almost courteous, but the fog carried a weight, heavy, watching. I followed the trail with my eyes. Around the cabin again, and again. The prints never repeated exactly, never matched. The patterns made no sense. Impossible angles, curves too sharp for feet, too precise to be natural. I pressed my palm to one of the prints. Cold, solid, a faint vibration pulsed through it, subtle, like a heartbeat pressed into the soil. Regret curled in my stomach. Not sudden, not sharp, slow, settling. I looked toward the trees. Shadows linger at the edge of the clearing, still and patient. The fog thickened slightly, curling around trunks and roots, hiding shapes I couldn't see. The cabin stood behind me, silent. Its windows reflected the gray light, pale and watchful. No eyes now, no whispers, just presence. The footprints wound farther than I could follow, circling, bending, always returning. I realized I had been walking among them all night, but they had never needed me to notice. I knelt again, tracing one more impression. The soil gave way beneath my fingers. Cold, damp, impossibly firm. And somewhere in the fog, I thought I heard it, a soft, deliberate scraping. Not behind me, not in front, but around. The forest, the cabin, the fog, all waiting. And I understood with a quiet, creeping certainty, these prints weren't made for me to follow. They were made for me to see. And night had returned, slow and deliberate. The fog lingered at my ankles, coiling through the roots and underbrush, curling like fingers around my boots. The forest felt hollow, stretched, yet alive in ways I couldn't name. Then I saw it. Fur, pale, luminescent in the moonlight, clinging to the branches above, moving with intention, not random, not wind-blown. Each twitch, each shift deliberate. I stopped. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Even the fog paused, curling tighter around my legs, almost protective, or perhaps warning. The fur moved again. It was playful, almost casual, yet every glance carried menace. Every flicker of white in the darkness felt like it was measuring me, weighing my presence. A branch shifted closer. I froze. The air smelled faintly sweet, like rot and honey mixed. Cold tickled my neck. I felt it watching from above, between the trees, beyond the fog. I blinked. The fur flickered, sometimes in the corner of my eye, sometimes directly above. Impossible shapes bent with the branches. Not quite animals. Not quite shadows. My breath came shallow. Each exhale vanished instantly into the fog. It tasted damp, earthy, metallic. I tried to track the movement, step by careful step. But each time I focused, the fur shifted again. Elusive, intentional. The branches quivered as if alive. Not shaking, not wind-blown. Just bending, adjusting, observing. Something moved behind me, soft and deliberate. Not fast, not loud, just present. I didn't turn. I couldn't. The fur, pale and glowing, drew my gaze upward again, stretching, sliding along limbs, always just out of reach, yet always aware of me. A soft rustle traced the ground beneath my feet. Leaves brushing, twigs snapping. The sound was quiet but deliberate, measured. Fear coiled slowly in my chest. Not sudden, not sharp. It settled like ice in my veins. I realized then that the forest wasn't simply alive. It was watching me through them, through the pale, luminescent fur, through the way it moved with intention. The night thickened, the fog pressed higher, and somewhere deep, I felt the forest smile. Not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. I moved forward, careful, slow, and the fur followed, playful, deliberate, and quietly menacing in the pale light of the moon. The cabin had grown quieter. Not empty, just waiting. The air thickened with dust and cold, curling around my shoulders like the fog outside. I had wandered the rooms before, tracing shadows that stretched too far, corners that seemed to pulse, whispering along walls I couldn't understand. The floorboards groaned softly beneath my feet, each creak deliberate, echoing in the dim light. Then I saw it, a door, hidden, as if it had grown overnight, set into the wall in a corner I had passed 100 times, now impossible to ignore. The wood was old, splintered at the edges. The handle was dark, cold metal against my fingertips. I wanted to touch it, Curiosity twisted tight in my chest. I wanted to know what lay beyond. But something warned me. A presence settled behind the door, patient and silent. It wasn't in the room. It was in the space beyond, pressing to the wood, through the air, through the fog that followed me inside. I didn't move. The cabin seemed to exhale, dust floating in thin motes that caught the faint light from the window. The air smelled of old rain, dry rot, and a faint, sour sweetness I couldn't place. I stared at the door. The handle gleamed faintly in the pale light. The shadow beneath it stretched longer than it should have, pooling into floorboards like ink and water. My hand hovered. I didn't push. I didn't pull. The urge was there, quiet and insistent. The silence thickened. Every breath echoed too loudly. The room held still. Even the shadows waited. A faint whisper slid along the wall near the door. I couldn't catch the words. Not meant for me. Just a warning. A promise. The fog outside swirled against the window pane, brushing faintly against the glass. A cold draft curled through the room, touching the door, lingering along the frame, almost alive. I stepped back. The floorboard groaned. Shadows in corners stretched, reaching toward the door as if to claim it. I knew then what I must do, not because I was brave, not because I wanted to, because I understood. Some doors are meant to be left closed. The handle remained cold under my gaze, silent, waiting, and I walked away. The cabin exhaled softly. The shadows receded slightly. The door stayed, hidden and patient, a threshold I would never cross. Fear lingered, curling in my chest like smoke, but behind it, an understanding settled. Some secrets were not meant for hands, or eyes, or curiosity. I left the room, and the door stayed behind me, silent, watching and untouched. The cabin seemed heavier tonight, not in weight, but in presence. Air thick with dust and decay pressed against my skin, cold and damp. Every breath tasted faintly metallic, mingled with rot. Above me, chains hung from the rafters, rusted, twisted, and swinging slowly, not moved by wind, not moved by touch. They shifted on their own, groaning softly, brushing faintly against each other. I stepped forward. The floorboards moaned beneath my weight. Each creak echoed far too long, stretching to the corners of the room. Then came the whispers, soft, faint, at first just echoes of sound, like memory brushing against the walls. But they grew clearer, soft syllables I couldn't understand, yet somehow familiar. Words I couldn't grasp, but each one felt personal, intimate, as if calling me out by name. The chains swayed in slow arcs, shadows stretching across the ceiling. They reflected the pale moonlight that slipped through the grimy windows. Each shadow elongated unnaturally, bending corners, folding into the walls. I reached for a chain, cold metal pressed against my fingers, heavier than it should have been. The whispers swirled around me, pressing close to my ears, brushing along my neck. Regret coiled in my chest, slow and insidious. Not panic, not fear, a quiet, pressing knowledge that I should not have come here, that I should leave. But curiosity tugged again, soft and insistent. I let my eyes drift toward the far corner. Shadows pooled there, darker than the rest, moving slightly as if something waited beneath. The whispers grew louder, not shouting, not urgent, but patient, calling, taunting. I realized the chains weren't just old metal. They weren't decoration. They were markers, holders of something long forgotten, something that remembered me, that had waited for me to return. A gust of cold air swept the room. Chains rattled in response, a hollow, metallic chorus. The whispers quivered and faded, curling back into the rafters. I stepped back. The chain swung slower now, settling into place. The shadows clung to the corners of the room. The whispers lingered faintly, a fading echo of their presence. Regret pressed heavier in my chest, and I knew, with a sinking certainty, that some things in this cabin weren't meant to be found. They were meant to wait, patient, and I had seen them. The forest thickened around me. Fog clung to the trunks, weaving through roots and underbrush. Every step felt slower than the last. Between the trees, I caught movement, shapes, Humanoid, but wrong. Too large. Too still. I blinked. They were gone. The fog shifted. Branches scraped softly against one another, almost forming words I couldn't understand. I strained my eyes, but nothing returned. I moved forward cautiously, sensing eyes where none should be. The forest pressed close, watching, patient. Each glimpse left a hollow in my chest. I wanted to run. I wanted to stop, but I couldn't tear my gaze from the spaces between the trunks. And though nothing followed me openly, I felt their presence, lingering, waiting. The cabin was quiet, almost reverent. The fog swirled outside, curling against the panes like cold fingers. A hand pressed against glass. Pale, faint, a single condensation mark, lingering as if someone had been there, breathing. I pressed my palm to it. Cool mist met skin, leaving a faint damp trace. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Even the fog stopped moving. Shadows pooled in corners. The room breathed with quiet rhythm, dust floating in slow spirals. I stepped back. The mark faded. The silence pressed heavier. Dread filled the spaces between my heartbeats. I wasn't alone. Not in the cabin. Not in the forest. And I could feel it. Fog swallowed the path. It rose to my knees, then my chest. Every step forward felt like wading through memory and shadow. Eyes followed me, unblinking. Too slow, yet perfectly aware. My heartbeat faltered. Each pulse echoed through the fog, announcing my presence. Branches scraped lightly against one another, whispering beneath the heavy air. The eyes blinked, slowly, deliberately. I felt the forest lean inward, listening. My breath came short and uneven. Every instinct screamed to turn, to flee. But I couldn't. The watcher was patient, and it was learning me. The night thickened. Fog swallowed sound, leaving only my uneven breathing. Soft, mournful howls drifted from every direction. Not loud, not violent, just enough to curl panic in my stomach. Tight and slow. The fog thickened, obscuring the path ahead. Shadows moved just beyond vision. Tall, narrow, bending in ways the forest shouldn't allow. I stepped carefully. Every movement amplified, my boots against wet soil echoing like drums in the stillness. The howls shifted, closer, then receding. Patternless, untraceable. I swallowed. Cold and damp rose from the ground, creeping into my lungs. The forest waited, listening, and the soft, mournful chorus pressed in. Inside the cabin, shadows stretched across the ceiling. Thick, folding into themselves, moving independently of light or angle. I tilted my head. They shifted, twisting almost alive, following nothing but their own rhythm. Dust floated in pale beams of moonlight. Each mote seemed to hover longer than gravity allowed. I wanted to leave, but the shadows watched, patient, waiting. Every step I took sounded loud, too loud. Floorboards groaned beneath my weight, echoes chasing me. Dread settled in my chest, cold and tight. The shadows paused, then shifted again. And I understood. The room had noticed me. A patch of fog lay ahead, thicker than the rest. Dense, alive. I stepped into it. Instantly, every sound died. My own breathing felt distant. Footsteps muffled, swallowed before hitting the ground. Isolation pressed in from every side. The forest continued, just beyond comprehension, but it no longer obeyed the rules of sound. Shadows moved through it silently. Shapes curved, twisted, and disappeared as I tried to focus. I felt my pulse alone in that quiet, echoing too far, too loud. The fog did not allow sound, but it absorbed presence, and I realized I was entirely exposed. The cabin floor groaned beneath me. I leaned over a gap in the boards. Two eyes stared up, unblinking, calculating. The wood between us seemed thinner than it should be. The room smelled faintly of wet rot, copper, and old dust. I froze. Every instinct screamed to pull back, but something kept me rooted. The eyes did not flinch. They did not look away. They measured me. My hands tingled, cold creeping through my sleeves. The floorboard creaked softly beneath weight I couldn't yet see. Fear wrapped around me, patient and deliberate. And I understood I was being observed from below in a way I could not reach. Branches scraped against the cabin walls, soft at first, then deliberate. They formed words I couldn't understand. My mind recoiled. I tried to ignore it, but the words persisted, curling and stretching along the wood. The air smelled faintly of pine and damp, metallic earth. Shadows stretched along the corners, reaching toward the branches as if to join in. Dread pressed in. Every inhale carried whispers through my chest. Every heartbeat echoed their rhythm. I could not move fast enough. I could not escape the sound. It clung to me, intimate, personal, and utterly inescapable. I returned to the tree line. Fog hung thick and restless. Shapes lurked between trunks. A figure emerged, tall, shadowed, motionless, yet I felt it draw nearer. Panic curled in my stomach. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, but the forest shifted with its presence. The air pressed close. My breath came short, fog curling from my mouth. Every instinct screamed to run. The creature remained still, patient, waiting, learning my fear. I opened the hidden door. A rush of cold fog slipped into the cabin, curling around my ankles. Rustling came from within, soft, deliberate. No shape moved. No one was there. The air smelled damp and metallic. Whispers threaded along the walls, too quiet to understand. I stepped back. The door creaked, echoing faintly. The sound was swallowed instantly by fog. Silence returned. Heavy, watching. The door remained open. The rustling persisted. Not loud, not urgent. Just there. The cabin seemed alive. Not in light or shadow, but in rhythm. It inhaled, exhaled. Dust floated in pale beams, spinning like they had a heartbeat. Walls shifted subtly. Floorboards hummed beneath my boots. The air pressed close, warm and damp, curling around my sleeves and neck. I stood in the center. The cabin pulsed around me. Quiet, measured, observant. I felt awe, not fear, not panic. A quiet understanding. The place was alive, breathing with the forest, connected in ways I could not name. I stepped into the forest alone. Fog swallowed all paths. Sound disappeared into its dense folds. Eyes glimmered faintly everywhere. I could feel them. Following, waiting, observing. The forest pressed close, thick and patient. Branches brushed my coat. Twigs cracked softly underfoot. I stopped. The fog curled around me. Silence pressed heavy. And I realized there was no escaping it. I walked on, alone, surrounded, and yet at peace. The fog accepted me. The forest whispered my name. And I walked into it, finally understanding.